So this is the way that you're going to set up and assemble the materials you need for the Groundwater Modeling Lab. The lab has three parts. The first part is going to be a simulation of a cross-section of a stream. So you're going to build this model, and you're going to make it out of these different components right here. The first thing you need are 2 sheets of plexiglass. They should be matched up by number. This is number 18. And you want the numbers to line up with each other so that the holes drilled through the plexiglass line up. Please note that one of your sheets of plexiglass has a small hole in it, right there. You'll need some hardware, and so you're going to need 4 bolts, 4 wing nuts, and you're going to need 8 washers. In addition, you're going to need a piece of flexible tubing, and then this foam material. So get all that stuff together, and we'll show you how to build the model. Okay, so to assemble the model, I'm going to take my 2 sheets of plexiglass, and I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts in here, and I want them to go through a washer. This is really important because the washer helps distribute forces across the plastic so it doesn't break. So make sure you've got enough washers. And then you're going to match it up with the sheet behind it. Let the pieces come together like that. Before you put on the wing nuts, make sure you put washers on the other side of the plastic as well. The wing nuts are just going to hand tighten. And this takes a little getting used to putting these on. Don't tighten them all the way down, just go ahead and get them started. You'll see here in a second why. Sometimes these bolts are a little tricky to work with. If they're dirty or if they've got some buildup of salts on them. So after you flail around with this for a little bit, once you've got the wing nuts on there, you're all set to go. I want to be able to pull this open a little bit like you can see here, where I can pull this apart. I'll loosen these up just a little bit, but not take them off completely. The next step is to take this plastic tubing. I'm not going to get water in it, but I'm going to get water on the outside of it. That's what I just want to get it sort of damp and sort of covered with a little bit of water. Again, it's on the outside, not on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and put this tubing down into my model like this. A couple things to note. Make sure you've got that hole on the plastic pointing up. Some of the plastic sheets are numbered with the numbers upside down, so don't let the numbers be your guide. Look for the hole. Once I get this in between, then I'm going to tighten down all these wing nuts. And I want to get it fairly tight. I don't want to break the plastic, that's the advantage of the washers. But I want to get it nice and tight so it's going to form a seal with the plastic tubing. And that little bit of water helps seal it up nice and tight. We don't want this model to leak. And so you can tighten this up. If you look at it carefully, you'll notice, and just go ahead and tighten it. The plastic does bend a little bit. See, it's got a little bit of a bend to it. But I'm looking right along here where the plastic and the tube come together. And I want to see that it's a nice solid seal. You can almost tell by looking at the edge of it. I don't want my model to fall over, so make sure the tube's not sticking out the bottom, and that's really important as well. Don't let the tube stick out below. The next step is to actually put sand into our model. And this can be done with the big buckets of sand that we've got. I'm going to go ahead and do this one right over top of the table, but usually do this over top of the bucket. We're just going to pour some sand in here. Not all the way to the top, but part way up. Something along those lines. I'm going to shake it down a little bit. And it looks like my model's about half full. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rubber foam material, and this is going to form the bottom of a stream channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sort of hold on to one side. I'm using a pencil as my guide to put this down into my model. And this is going to represent a stream channel that we're going to have. And I'm going to go ahead and add more sand to my model. I have to add it on the sides now. I don't want my stream channel to get filled up. I'll turn around this way. And we'll pour in the sand. Like that. Shake it around a little bit. I'm going to tap it down just a little bit, but not too much. I don't want to really pack the sand. It represents the ground, but we want the water to flow through the ground. So we're not going to really pack it down too hard. A couple little taps like this. And voila! Our model looks a lot like the one that I have over here. In the next step of making the model, we want to add water. And you want to read the directions carefully at this point. It talks about dribbling water in on the surface. Also make sure you've got a catchment basin from this point out. You're going to get water all over the place otherwise. You might spill your model and dump the sand as well. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this over the catchment basin. I'm just going to add water in on either side. And what you should notice is that the water is working its way down into our simulated ground. It's okay if water falls over the edge or on the plastic. But what we want to do is wet the model. Get all of it completely soaked with water. As you can see, you basically have water that is percolating down into our model, down through the sand. This is called an influent condition. The water is moving into the ground. And in fact, if I put water into my stream over here, you'll see that that water will soak through the foam pad and it infiltrates into the ground. I always remember it going into the ground to remember infiltrate. As I keep adding water to my model, you'll see that the whole thing will get somewhat soaked. But the other thing you should notice right now is as the model fills up full of water, even on the sides, you can see some water seeping into the stream channel. Once the model is completely full, if I keep adding water over here on either side, you're going to see that the stream channel is going to fill up. So that's what I'm looking at right here, is that there's a water line. Although there it goes soaking into the model again. We want to keep adding water until the whole thing is wet. And at this point you can see that as I add water on either side of the stream channel, now that the model is completely soaked, or pretty much completely soaked, any water that I add on the sides is going to push down and into the stream channel. And so I can see that there's a constant water volume there. If I keep adding water on the side of the channel, and this is what I want to do, just let it dribble in over here, you'll see the water level in the stream will get up to that small hole that's in the plastic. That hole represents the height of our river that we want to have. So this is the river channel, this is the river height that you're going to have in that channel, and you've got some land on either side that's higher than the channel itself. This is what you need to do to prep your model for the next step. In the next step, we're going to take and add a pollutant underground, and we're going to add it to either side of the model. We're going to try to get it to be over in these spots over here. The pollutant represents an underground storage tank that has sprung a leak. This is not uncommon, especially for things like gasoline or other materials that we keep in underground tanks. To add the pollutant, I'm going to go ahead and fill up a pipette full of colored fluid. I'm going to without squeezing the pipette, I'm going to take and stick this down into the ground. And I don't want to go too deep. I want to get down there a little ways, and then I'm going to squeeze some pollutant below the river channel. And I'm just squeezing it in there. And because I added fluid, you can see that the water rose a little bit. I'm going to do this on either side of my river channel. I'm going to go ahead and try to put a second one down in here. I'd really like that colored water to not be up against the plastic edge. Sometimes you'll get sand into your tube. I got some in here. Up, and there's, you can see where the pollutant is down below the river. It's maybe a little close to the river. That's a little closer than I wanted to get. For the rest of the lab, what you're supposed to do is observe what happens when you add or dribble water onto the ground. Not necessarily into the river itself, but onto the ground. So I'm just going to keep adding water. It's going to flow out of this hole. It's going to drip to the bottom and into my catchment basin. This will take probably 5 to 10 minutes of just adding water on either side. You want to do a drawing before and after you've added the water. Keep adding water and keep your eyes on your pollutants that you've added over here on this side. Make sure you do a before and after sketch. The after sketch would be, well, you have to see what happens. And then you'll know how to answer the questions in the lab packet. That's pretty much it for part 1. When you're done with your model in part 1, make sure you come over and find one of these white basins. You want to bring the model over to that basin. And you're basically going to disassemble it in the water. It's not that hard, and it's pretty easy to clean up. I'm going to pull the tube or the foam out, rinse it off a little bit. If there's any colored water on there, I'd like to get it off of the foam. Now I've got my sand in the whole thing here. Just going to go ahead and put it into the basin. I'm going to unscrew the hardware. I'm going to try to catch the hardware, but if it falls in the water, that's okay. So I took out some of the hardware. You could rinse it off, actually. You can see that it's rusted a little bit from being exposed to the water. Reach in and get the pieces parts. If there's already sand in the bucket, you can finger through the sand and be able to pull out the hardware if you've dropped any into the sand. Please recover all your hardware. It's really important that we get this all ready for the second model. As it falls apart, you'll see that the water will get kind of colored by the food coloring. And again, you can just do all this by hand. I'm going to reach in and find my hardware pieces. Get them all out. There's some on this side here. Okay, there'll be a collection of those hardware pieces. You want to rinse off your plastic sheets like that. There'll be a drying spot set up, or you might even have to dry these off with paper towel to use them again in the second part. Your tube can come out as well. And then I'll clean up the water and the sand later. Please try to keep the sand from going down the sinks. This is really important as far as keeping the sinks flowing. For part 2 of the lab, you're going to basically have the same equipment with a couple of minor changes. So go ahead and assemble your plexiglass with the hardware. Once I've got that nice and tight, I can do a quick visual inspection and see. It looks like I've got a nice solid seal on the tube with the plastic. You can tighten it down a little bit. Don't go overboard tightening it down. It should, with that little bit of water on the plastic tubing, make a good seal. I'm going to go ahead and start adding sand like I did before. I'm going to do it over the table again. You guys do it over the bucket. I'm going to pour in about halfway up the model with sand. This time we're going to actually put a well into our model. This is the well, this blue straw with the mesh at the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and just set it down into the model a little bit. I'm not going to really drill a well, I'm just going to set it down in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and pour sand on either side so that my well is buried underground. This is a little different than in reality, of course. We have drilling bits and equipment that's able to bore a hole into the ground. It doesn't work very well, trust me, from experience, if you do it by filling the model completely up at first. So go ahead and add the sand. There we go. So this time the model is going to be designed such that you can't really get water out of the model unless you're taking and pulling it up from the well. As before, I want to go ahead and put my model in a basin. I'm going to add water like I did before. I'm going to soak the whole model. What you'll notice is that the water starts pooling on the top of the ground if the model is full of water down deep into the model. I can still see a little bit of area on the back side, not so much on the front where you can see it. I've got a couple of dry spots. I'm just going to keep adding water until the sand shows that it's saturated. I think my model is about as saturated as it wants to get. So you can see that water's pooled up on the top, on the surface. What I want to do is I want to actually take an empty pipette, squeeze the air out, and then go into the bottom of my well and pull some water up the well. When I do this, you'll actually see the water level at the surface go down. You can just squirt the excess water into your bin. So I'm going to reach down, pull up some water, and now I can see that the water level is below the surface of the sand at the top. This is very important that I get that water below the surface level at the top. If I squirt a little bit of water back on the surface, you can see it soaks right back in. So I'm basically taking water out of the ground and returning that water on the top of the surface. In part 2, we're going to simulate having a pollutant poured on the surface. A typical pollutant that we get on the surface might be antifreeze, ethylene glycol, which is really poisonous actually to a lot of animals. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of ethylene glycol, or at least my simulated chemical, on the surface. You can see that it's right on the very top, but again, I want to make sure that there's no water that it's going to run around through. I'm going to take my empty pipette, reach down into the well, and I'm going to pull some water up out of the well. I'm going to take that water I just sucked up out of the well, and this time that's going to be my rainwater on the top. And I want to distribute that water all the way across the top of my model. Then I'm going to go back into my well and pull up more water from the bottom of the well. What you should notice is that the pollutant will start moving down below the top of the surface. Take that water, squirt it back on, go into my well, pull out the water from the bottom, spray that water on top. Just keep doing this and watch what happens to your plume. The idea is we want to trace a path that the pollutant is going to take in our model. And you can see that it's already moved down a little bit. You need to do this very carefully and watch it very carefully. Keep doing this until you happen to maybe possibly see some pollution come up in the well water. And you'll see it'll be red tainted color. in the pipette. As before, when you're done with this model, go ahead and take it over to a basin, disassemble it, take the pieces apart, and go ahead and return the hardware to the right location, the plastic plexiglass to where we're collecting those. Go ahead and take the well out and clean it off, take the tape off, and then clean off your tube as well.